Hi there. Let me take a few minutes and give you some guidance regarding steps 11, 12, and 13, constructing the actual ogive itself and doing some simple manipulation with it. So, very good. Step 1, make sure that the values from the second column, so that's the but less than column, those need to be in L1, and then the values from the fifth column, that's the relative cumulative frequency column, so the decimals, which essentially we're going to think of as percentages, those need to go into list number 2. So having done that, you want to make sure that plot number 1 is turned on. So I'm going to press second y equals. I can see plot number 1 is on, but notice I can see that it's the histogram option currently. That makes sense. That's what we just used to fill in the table on the front of the handout. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to press enter. I'm going to press the down arrow, and then I'm going to press the right arrow in order to select the line graph type. So I'll press enter. So it's important that the X list is L1 and the Y list is L2. Those are correct. That looks good. So you want to make sure that the other plots are off. So just to verify that, I'm going to press second Y equals again. And plot 1 is on. The other 2 plots are off. That looks good. So the window that I want to use to graph this ogive, I'll press the window button. Notice that we're not making a change to the X minimum and the X maximum or even to the X scale. So understand these values are the same. They still represent the blood glucose levels. The difference is, though, the Y values are no longer counts. They are percentages. So a Y minimum then, instead of -2, a Y minimum of -0.2 would be a good plan. So that's a Y minimum of essentially -20%. So that'll take us down a little ways so that we can trace and see our values at the bottom of the screen. A Y maximum of 1.1 would be perfectly acceptable. That would represent 101%. So that's a little more than what we need. Looks good. So the Y scale isn't really that important. I'm going to make the Y scale 0.1. So very good. At this point, if you have everything set up correctly, if you press graph, you should get your ogive. And there it is. So it is a line graph. It is a line graph. Here we go. So steadily, as our blood glucose levels increase, the percentage of the subjects that we have accounted for rises all the way ultimately up to 100% of our subjects. So next, what we would like to do is use this ogive. So that's what question number 12 is. The goal for these subjects was to have a fasting plasma glucose level, so if you will, a glucose level between 90 and 130. So we can read that off of the ogive, but we have to be a little bit clever. So if I press the trace button, which is not what I want to do, don't press the trace button. If I press the trace button, it will only allow us to trace the ordered pairs which were plotted in order to create the line graph. That's not what I want to do. Instead, without pressing the trace button, if you press any of the arrow keys, so notice I have a cursor now that, if you will, floats around the screen. So what I'm interested in is positioning it so I can get an X value as close to 90 as possible. Right now my X value is 225, so I'm going to press the left arrow. I want to get my X value down to 90. So I'm getting a little closer, down to 105, 102, 98, 94. That looks like about as close as I can get, 90.9. That's about as close as I can get. So, but now I want to position this so that I can read the Y value that corresponds to this X value on the ogive. So I'm going to press the down arrow until that cursor basically lands on my ogive. And again, we're just approximating here. So it looks like I'm pretty close right there. So this gives me a Y value of about 0.114, 0.115. That's about 11%. So what that literally means, this means that at a blood glucose level of 90, 11% of subjects have a blood glucose level below 90. So notice that that is not the goal is to be between 90 and 130. So the next thing I want to do is reposition my cursor so that the x value is 130, or as close to 130 as I can get. So I need to go over to the right a little bit. I'm at 128, 131.9, 128.19. Either one of these is reasonably close. So I'll use this one, 128.19. So I'm going to get onto the ogive. Looks like right about there I'm pretty close to the ogive. So that gives me a y value of 0.32. So what this says is 32% of subjects have a blood glucose level below 128. So if I'm interested in the number of subjects that have a blood glucose level between these values, then I can just subtract those two percentages. So 32% were below 128-ish, 130-ish, 11% were below the 90. So if I subtract those, I get about 21%. So that's about, it looks like approximately a fifth of subjects are between the levels of 90 and 130. So only a fifth of subjects are actually maintaining or hitting their goal. That's not a particularly good result, but it is what it is. That's what the data show us. So what I want you to see, though, is by tracing the ogive, we can identify the percentages that we need in order to answer these questions. So last, for question number 13, our job is to try to find the center of this distribution. So, of course, when I had all of the data values in, I could have tried to, if you will, identify the center. But there's another way that you can do this. So the center of this distribution, in terms of the median is the value where 50% of the observations are below and 50% of the observations are above that value. So one of the things that I could do is try to find the location on my ogive where y is equal to 0.5, or 50%. So there's a nice way that I can do this, and these are what the steps in question 13 are trying to identify for you. So if you press the y equals button, right now you'll see the cursors flashing in y sub 1. I'm going to type in 0.5. Then I'm going to press the graph button. So what's going to happen here? We are graphing the horizontal line y equals 0.5. That horizontal line represents 50%. So I'm interested in finding this intersection here. Where the horizontal line intersects my ogive, that's the value that I'm interested in identifying. So this time, if you press the trace button, this, if I press the right and left arrow, this is going to trace along the ordered pairs on the ogive, and that's not what I want to do. If I press the up arrow, though, now I'm going to be tracing along the horizontal line y equals 0.5. Now if I press the right and left arrow buttons, I can trace along that horizontal line, and I want to get as close as I can to the intersection point. So I'm trying to find the specific location on the ogive. That's about as good as I can do right there. I'm trying to find the location on the ogive that corresponds to 50%, and I have located that. So right here, this 50% is telling me that 50% of subjects have a blood glucose level that is below 143. So that 143, that should approximately be the median of this distribution. So that's a way that you can find the median by using your ogive. So to get rid of that horizontal line there, if I don't want that line anymore, or if I want to plot different lines as you're going to be doing in question 14, if you press the second button and then press the y equals button, oops, I didn't want to do that. That's okay. That takes me to my stat plots. I want to just press the y equals button by itself, and that takes me straight into the y equals menu, and I can just hit the clear button. That will take away the line y equals 0.5. So if I go back to my graph, all I have is the ogive. So if you take a look at the next video then, try question 14 questions A, B, C, D, and E. Try these on your own and then watch the video and you can check your answers. We'll see how well you did.